So I recorded this and realised that my microphone was in fact not on. Let's try again, shall we? It is with a slightly somber heart that I reflect upon Skyward Sword's current status within the Zelda community. Its story is a messy one, to say the least. Upon being released in November 2011, it was showered with a ridiculous amount of praise. The Zelda series is no stranger to glowing reviews. However, these critics were acting as if Skyward Sword had done nothing less than save their lives. For example, IGN stated that The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is the greatest Zelda game ever created. It's the best game for Wii and one of the finest video game accomplishments of the past 10 years. Skyward Sword will be remembered for revitalizing a franchise.
No.
I'm pretty sure it's remembered as quite the opposite of that. Time has not been kind to this game, with many fans calling it the worst 3D Zelda title, which is admittedly a high bar. It does not help that Skyward Sword's successor, the critically beloved Breath of the Wild, is essentially the opposite of it in more ways than one, and has done no service to assist Skyward Sword's negative stigma. In my humble opinion, Skyward Sword is a great, not masterful, but great game, held back by a few gaping flaws. With extreme opinions abundant surrounding the game, it is now time for Nintendo to give Skyward Sword a second chance on the Switch. Hopefully this time, fans and critics alike will be more measured, and thus Skyward Sword shall be remembered for what it does right, not what it does wrong. You may be asking, why are we talking about Skyward Sword being remade now of all times? In answering this question, I will say this. Nintendo has a recent track record of releasing their Zelda remakes a decade after their original release. This happened for both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. If you think about it, Skyward Sword was released in 2011, which means that it will be its 10th anniversary next year. Remake time. Also, Eiji Aonuma, the Zelda producer, came out and specifically stated at a Japanese concert, "I know what you are thinking. Skyward Sword for Switch, right?" This, in combination with Nintendo re-establishing ownership over Skyward Sword's trademark, has created quite a stir within the Zelda community. And so that is why it is now time to discuss that Skyward Sword needs a remake for the Switch. Despite its flaws, which will be covered later, certain aspects of Skyward Sword are achieved masterfully. The story, while repetitive, is one of the best in the franchise. All the characters burst with personality, and some key individuals go through meaningful growth, such as Groose. The dungeons are some of the very best in the series, the Ancient Cistern and the Sand Ship being clear standouts. Music-wise, the game is simply spectacular, bringing home the full Symphony of the Goddess orchestra. As a Zelda fan, I constantly see that many fans have forgotten these glorious aspects of the game, and a remake would do much to bring the positives to the front of fans' minds when they think of Skyward Sword. A remake would have the potential to highlight the game's strengths while also ironing out the flaws. Speaking of mishaps, I will not lie. Skyward Sword drops the ball in quite a few ways. Some of these are because of hardware limitations, some because it was on the casual Wii, and some are just padding that serve very little purpose. The first thing that an HD remaster would fix is quite obviously the graphics. The original Skyward Sword ran at 480p, which does not hold up to modern graphical standards at all. However, Skyward Sword's watercolour art style is still pretty stunning 9 years later. So, keeping with that lovely art style, and then up-resing the game to 1080p, much like Wind Waker to Wind Waker HD, would be rather marvellous indeed. Next, let's discuss what has to be cut. Skyward Sword, I'm sorry to say, has a fair amount of unnecessary padding that stretches out the playtime just a little bit too much. Some of this includes the 3 imprisoned fights, the Song of the Hero questline, the Silent Realm quests, and just simple fetch quests. Wow, there seems to be a quest theme going on here. The remakes could cut down on these by either making them optional or reducing the length of some of them. For example, instead of 3 imprisoned fights, how about combining the first fight with the second, and have the final epic one with Groose to be the second? For the Song of the Hero quest, make it completely optional. By that point in the game, the player has defeated the Leviathan and is ready to make their way to the final temple. There's no practical need for the Song of the Hero. Perhaps if the player does it, they can get an upgrade or some such thing, but it isn't mandatory to complete the game. Speaking of cutting things, much of Fi's expositionary dialogue could and should be cut. That speaks for itself, I think. Zelda fans aren't babies, we know when our controllers are nearly depleted. Thank you very much. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the controls. I hesitate to call this a negative, as they never really bothered me personally, but many people found that the Wii's motion controls were not as responsive as they would have liked. The most infamous example of the bad controls is Nintendo's own Shigeru Miyamoto having trouble with the game live for all to see on stage. Yeah, when your game embarrasses one of the most respected people in video game history, there's something wrong there. I blame this on the fact that the game was still in development, and that the sensors were bound to get confused with all the wirelessness in the room. Can you tell that I'm not a technician? But I digress. My point is that the motion controls aren't perfect. However, they were far from abysmal if you had the right setup and you knew what motions to perform. The question is, how is Nintendo going to fix the motion controls? While some have suggested that Nintendo remakes the game without them, I don't think this is the answer. Skyward Sword is so tightly built around that control scheme that you would essentially have to make a new game to get rid of the motion controls. And when you're putting that much effort into a remake, you might as well just make a new game. No, in my view, there is a high chance that the game's motion controls will stay largely the same, but with the exception of us using the Switch's more responsive Joy-Cons rather than the old Wii remotes. With this, hopefully less people will find the controllers unresponsive, and more will be able to enjoy the game. Lastly, in terms of things to add to improve Skyward Sword, adding a way to make the Loftwing fly faster, much like Wind Waker HD's Swift Sail, would quicken sky travel and make the sky feel less empty. Of course, they could also add more islands in the sky, but I would be content with a faster Loftwing. Next, add fast travel, much like how it was in Breath of the Wild. This would minimize the annoyance of backtracking. Finally, add a quest log similar to the Bomber's Notebook from Majora's Mask and the menu from Breath of the Wild. All of these things would make the game more enjoyable to play, and that is only a positive. With all the flaws fixed and the new quality of life improvements added, hopefully more fans will be able to enjoy Skyward Sword. It might even be one of the best Zelda games. The game as it currently is flawed, but it has amazing ideas that were not executed as well as they could have been. With the Switch, Nintendo has an opportunity to give this gem a second chance to thrive and be the masterpiece it should be. That is why Skyward Sword needs a remake. Thank you all very much for watching. Let's hope that Skyward Sword gets remade sooner rather than later. It is a fantastic game and really deserves it. With that being said, this was quite an enjoyable video to make, so I hope you all liked it. Now for the ending ramblings, you know how it is, 1, 2, 3. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter and subscribe for more Zelda goodness. Anyway, I've been the Aussie Viking, and I'll see you all later.